Thank you so much. Chancellor, Mr. Gibbs, and organizers and attendees, thank you so very much for having this and for giving us the privilege of your time and your interest. My name is Beth Grossman, and I am the Republican candidate for District Attorney of Philadelphia. And this election is a political race for a non-political office. Because the District Attorney's office, it's irrelevant what party a DA is, because when you're a victim of crime or when crime occurs to you, nobody ever asks what party you belong to. Now that being said, it's also a race where experience matters and experience counts. I spent 21 and a half years in the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office, where I began my career in September 1993. It was my first job out of law school. During those next 21 and a half years, I served in every division of that office, from trials to juvenile to law to investigations and to narcotics, in various units within there, from municipal court to juvenile to felony waivers to insurance fraud to special investigations to narcotics. I served as assistant chief of the Municipal Court Unit, training new baby DAs, as I like to call them. And I spent 8 years as chief of the Public Nuisance Task Force Unit, where I found my passion working with communities to help alleviate quality of life and public nuisance issues, such as drug houses, brothels, violent bars, speakeasies, you name it, we did it. I investigated corruption. I investigated and prosecuted police officers. So I am seeking to restore integrity to the District Attorney's Office and to also focus on several things. My platform is this: to begin prevention on both ends. And by that I mean working with the school district to prevent youth from getting into the juvenile justice system at all, including pre-arrest diversion programs, which is working in the school district now. I think that's very important to do that. Early intervention and education is incredibly important, including education regarding heroin and opioids and issues such as domestic violence. And I also believe in working on the other end, and that is working with returning citizens, because they need to have a net and a guidance back into society, and also to be able to use their knowledge in working with juveniles, preventing them from making the turns and mistakes that they did. Also, it's very important for what we do in the courtrooms every day, and that is always to champion the rights of victims and survivors of crime. The role of a prosecutor is one of the most important and stringent ones of any type of law when you're dealing with people's liberty. And I take that oath to run an office of integrity, of the highest of ethics, and to protect the constitutional rights of everybody who enters the system, including those accused of crime. So once again, I thank all of you for your attention. Well, I would say that it feels good to be home. That's the first thing I said, because I've spent my professional career there. I would welcome those I don't know, say hello to those who have been my colleagues for many years. And I would congratulate them, because they've been through a rough time. There's been a great deal of uncertainty in the DA's office through what has happened with Seth Williams, and nobody likes unknowing things. Nobody likes things when they are unstable, but they still continue to hold their head high, go into the criminal justice center every day, and do what they took an oath to do, and they deserve to be commended for that. I would also tell them that first and foremost, we will maintain the highest standard of ethic, and as the individual whose name is on the door, you lead by example, and that means accepting nothing from anybody. If somebody approaches you something and with regards and anything is inappropriate, whether it is a police officer, whether it is an elected official, whether something is off with the case, you are to report it to your supervisor first and foremost, because justice is, sometimes Mr. Krasner and I do agree, justice is just that. It is justice. It is not convictions. If we have the wrong person, it is our obligation to investigate that as soon as possible, because that is what justice is. So that's where I would start, and just to tell them all that I look forward to working with all of them and that I'm proud of them.
Thank you.
Well, absolutely. First, for 2 years, I was assigned to our Special Investigations Unit, where I did investigate and prosecute police officers, and that is what I did. Nobody is above the law, including an officer, whether he is on duty whether he is off duty. I think in recent years the investigation, I think it varies, but has gotten quicker, but it does need to be as expeditious as possible in light of concerns all across the country, what you brought up, because the public wants to know and it cannot be shrouded in mystery. Now, sometimes things take a while if it is grand jury, but if it's something that can be shared, then we do have an obligation to do that. But look, you prosecute everybody. If evidence is there, that is what you do. So I have no issue with that. If it is a fatal police shooting, if it is something as serious as that, I believe information should come from the district attorney's office to the decedent's family and anybody else they seek to bring with them, as opposed to any miscommunications that might come through the media, unintentional, but just so that they hear from the district attorney, where this investigation is going, what is going on. But no one's above the law.
Thank you, ma'am.
Well, that being said, just with regard to the Guardian Civic League, I was in the midst of reaching out to them, and that's when they endorsed you. But that being said, yes, I am endorsed by the Fraternal Order of Police, but I'm my own thinking being, and that was a unanimous decision by the members of that fraternal organization, not just Mr. McNesby. Now, I don't know whether we can bridge the gap between the FOP and Mr. Asa Khalif. I don't know that, but what can be done is bridging the gap between concerns of Black Lives Matter and the district attorney's office, because we are the ones who bring charges. We are the ones who investigate police shootings, whether they injure somebody or they are fatal. So if anybody has deep or great concerns, I think it is the district attorney's office to sit and discuss that with whoever wishes to approach the DA. I think that's very important. I think communication is important, because otherwise we're going to get nowhere with divisiveness. And I certainly in no way, shape, or form condone or agree with name calling on any which side, whether it was words Mr. McNesby used or those that are used, by Mr. Khalif or those who are screaming at police officers. It goes both ways and it doesn't get us anywhere. Well, first of all, I would commit to leaving all of them that are in there. There is almost, I think, 27 of them. It's completely extraordinary, because when you catch people on, and some result in convictions, some you get your records expunged, but a diversionary program sort of gives, for those who may not know, gives a person a chance to get certain services, get job training, and they can almost work off what would have been a conviction, and they get nothing, and the case is withdrawn. So it's many of them are very positive things to so people don't get saddled with a criminal record, and hopefully they don't return to the system again. So bringing any in, I think we need to look at some. It's a little bit different, but catching those who are involved in human trafficking, because they are truly victims. They are not necessarily those who are defendants, something like that. But I think we're only limited by our creativity, so I'm open for anything. I don't have any in particular in mind, but I am happy to keep expanding and adding to what is already there. Well, first, I have 10 years of management experience. Comes from being assistant district attorney, chief assistant district attorney in the Municipal Court Unit, which is a unit we're training 30 DAs, as well as approximately 40 to 50,000 cases went through there a year, as well as chief of the Public Nuisance Task Force unit, where I ran a staff of approximately 18 people, as well as I spent 1 year of chief of staff at the Department of Licensing and Inspection. So I learned overall how to manage a large city department, including HR, budgeting, training, things of that nature, as well as the day-to-day operations. That being said, the structure of the DA's office with the first assistant and 6 or 7 deputies, which is essentially a cabinet style, is something that I would continue to do, and then you have your chiefs below. As for young DAs, I think it is important to be we are only limited by our creativity. So I would like to be a DA in that office that is seen and about and knows everyone's names, and actually to sit, whether monthly, with each unit and be open to suggestions. In fact, not having supervisors there, just me with the young DAs, so they get to know me, I get to know them, and to hear what their suggestions are, because you never know where you're going to strike gold. Just because you've been there for so many years doesn't mean you know everything, and you don't. So I think hearing from new DAs will bring a fresh perspective. I think it's very important, and that's something I would certainly be open to. Well, I sat on the hiring committee for 12 years, and I know that there is a diversity recruitment committee, and there has been. I think in many ways it's very hard to get people to come over to the prosecution side. I think it's a sensitive issue. It can be incredibly difficult, but I think we just have to do better. We call a lot from our interns, and maybe it's just having better dialogue, not in the context of a job interview, but just general informational sessions at law schools with diversity, our diversity recruitment group, as opposed to sort of that one-on-one, I'm applying for a job type of thing, as well as welcoming people to come and spend the day with new DAs. Come in and see what it's like, or come and watch a homicide trial, or so people can actually see what the function is, how they would feel being as a prosecutor, and it's sort of a different approach to that.
Thank you.
Well, I think we have to set out what we plan to do. Part of my training, what I would like to do very quickly, because it was never part of my training coming up as a DA, but for the new generation of DAs, is I would actually like to have a training segment where returning citizens come and speak to new prosecutors. I think that is very important. I think it opens up relationships in a different way, and it allows us to learn how to focus that there is another person across the aisle, not just a folder.
Thank you.
Sure. I mean, first of all, we have to understand, we have to define what fair is. If it's something that has to be an absolute bias, because we can't expect things to go our way all the time. But I would never, ever seek to embarrass a judge publicly. I think that is bad form. I don't think that it should be done. It reflects badly on the office. But I think the only way to do that is to sit down with dialogue, as well as obviously with whatever proof that there is, whether it's memorandum, whether it is notes of testimony, whether it is statistics or data from, convictions or pleas or acquittals or things of that nature. But it's like anything else, you have to have the evidence to back it up. But I think it involves discussion with court administration, if possible, with that judge. And I feel the same way, like you can't have somebody who's so defense-oriented, nor is it appropriate to have somebody who's so Commonwealth-oriented. We need fairness.
Thank you.
Again, that's a tough one. I mean, obviously depends on the facts of the case. What is it? I mean, some cases are easy, where you just need investigation, where, you have your evidence, you have your police report, your 49, and you could go. Other things might be more complex, and you need a grand jury. You need the subpoena power, you need the secrecy. It's such an odd legal animal, but again, it depends on the case. I don't think you can cookie cutter it. You can't. I think, with police cases, if possible, transparency is always better, but there's going to be some cases where you need the tool of the grand jury. Well, I've charged them and prosecuted them, so I had no issue with that, okay? So that's what I did. That's what you do, because it is not right. So there may be certain cases where a special prosecutor is needed from out of county. Who knows? There's always an odd, strange case, or if there's some type of thing where the DA has a relationship with that officer, or it warrants recusal. But I have worked with some fine people, and that's how I would run that unit. You take the finest, most experienced people, and if the evidence is there, they're getting charged, period.
Thank you.
Well, I think in actually recent years, I think charging has gone down with everything but the kitchen sink kind of thing. I think it's become more stringent, especially requiring the amount of proof that comes in at the charging level decision, which is not a bad thing. But I think, again, you have to look at every case. I will not cookie cutter it, and I don't want our statistics base to be on how many. It has to be on, what the evidence is. So, I think it just depends on each case. I don't think you can say yay or nay. I know my opponent says he doesn't want to bring charges for insignificant cases. I don't know what an insignificant case is. I think every case is different. It needs to be looked at. Well, as it stands now, currently, there is current litigation in federal court. So at this point, both the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office and the Philadelphia Police Department have agreed that they will not use any forfeiture money for their budgets. So that's where we stand right now. So with regard to forfeiture, you mean about the money or the act of forfeiture itself?
The money and the act.
So the money, now what the statute permits is that some of this money, or I guess if the money's not being used, it can be used pursuant to the statute. It can be used for crime fighting or drug fighting initiatives. So, which is not a bad thing, which could certainly go to drug education. You know, as we all know, we are in the midst of an enormous heroin opioid crisis, which is ghastly. So I don't know whether it could go to treatment or prevention or that type of thing. With the act itself or utilizing this, you know, I think that it should still, and a recent Pennsylvania Supreme Court came down, which made the standard of proof a little bit higher now for the Commonwealth to be clear and convincing evidence. So in those cases, I think forfeiture can be used sparingly for those drug trafficking organizations. We do have some here that have connections to cartels in Mexico. It's frightening, as well as to pill mills where doctors are making money hand over fist by writing illegal prescriptions. For example, that's how the Dr. Gosnell abortion clinic case started. It really started as an investigation into illegal prescriptions. So the tool is still there. Now, as for, you know, where the money went, I had no authority. I have no jurisdiction over that, so I can't speak to that. But if the money is going to be used, I think the DA's office should have at least oversight of it as to where it is going and to what it is being used, not disappearing into the general fund. Well, as you know, the death penalty is used very, very rarely in Pennsylvania. We are in the middle of a moratorium, and the last person who was voluntarily executed was in 1962. That being said, I will not outright refuse to utilize it. I think there are certain catastrophic cases, such as, for example, Dylan Roof, who killed 9 people in a church down south, or it is a child who was tortured, or an elderly person. I mean, again, it depends on the facts of the case, but I would not rule it out utilizing it. It would be a rare instance, because those cases, you have to make sure that it's certainly the right person. We don't want any errors, and of course, obviously, post-trial, it costs an enormous amount to litigate them with everything that goes on. So I think we have to be very cognizant of what we want to do with it, as well as be, you know, what is the most effective way to utilize district attorney's budget and resources as well.
Thank you. Ms. Grossman.
I would only agree to it if it was legislated. I would only agree to it if there is a provision within that legislation if the neighbors will allow the neighbors to accept it or reject it within their neighborhood, because too many times I have seen it receive complaints when oftentimes you would have a recovery house pop up in the dead of night. Okay, so unless there's neighborhood buy-in, people get to go to zoning hearings and community groups and testify whether they want something or not. So unless it is legislated, unless it is regulated, and unless there is neighbor buy-in, I will not agree to that. Thank you very much, and thank you. It's good to see you. I am proud of my career. I know what my opponent has spoken of, but I took my oath of office very seriously. I know how I conducted myself. I know how I ran my unit, and I know how I would seek to run that office with the highest level of standards of integrity and ethics. The core function of the district attorney's office is to prosecute. It is not pleasant, and it is sad, but it doesn't mean that it has to be all about convictions. It can be about successfully helping people through various diversion programs, which are empathetic and sympathetic, such as our vet court, which helps individual vets who deal with post-traumatic stress disorder, who deal with addiction problems because they have served our country and they come back and they are not getting services and they fall into crime. So there are plenty of things that leads this system. It has become so much more compassionate in the years since I first started. And I have to say, actually, it has become a wonderful thing since 1993. And what really has made me very happy, it is so less of a silo approach. When I first started, it was DA's office, public defender's office, courts. Nobody had anything to do with anybody else. And you know what? It is so different now. It is so collaborative with all the partners of the criminal justice system under the MacArthur grant, where everybody is working together to decrease pretrial population while keeping in mind public safety, while talking about bail reform, while talking about what's the best way to get defendants to come to court. And you know what? It's amazing. And it's a good change, and it's heading in the right direction because we are working together. But I would never, ever lose sight of the fact that we have to champion the rights of victims and survivors of crime, because their voices count. Because he talks about impoverished communities. Well, guess what? That's where our victims come from, okay? And they must never, ever be forgotten. And I will run that unit appropriately, but it doesn't mean it can't be run without compassion and empathy. And I will acknowledge that our most vulnerable members of society are young African American males, and I believe that's where prevention has to come from getting them into the system at all. But there are always going to be those crimes that are so horrific that those individuals are going to have to pay, because we can't lose sight of the fact that Individual actions result in consequences. So that being said, I am proud of my record. I have the ability and the experience to manage that office, to manage a large city office, and with the creativity and the skill, because you know what, I don't need on-the-job training. I can hit the ground running on January 4th. So again, experience matters, experience counts, and I thank all of you.
Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you.